So really, we're entering from week 6. Actually, from week 5. As soon as we enter spiritual death and spiritual rebirth, and make it really clear in the book that we're entering into mysteries. And when you try to enter into mysteries, if you're not careful, you actually end up talking more about them. But actually, that can get you further and further away from them. We're definitely entering mysteries. Actually, we're already in mysteries. Like the thing that always strikes me is that we talk about the mind, but we don't know what the mind is. Nobody knows what the mind is. It's still the big problem in philosophy, for instance. How does, a certain amount of grey matter create this incredible amphitheatre called life? You can see where things light up in the brain, but nobody knows how you end up with this. Yeah. All the primary issues of life, space and time, subjectivity and objectivity, they're all actually deeply mysterious. And the only reason we don't experience them like that is because we don't experience them very deeply. We're caught on the surface of our mind very often. So we don't experience as they actually are, which is completely mysterious and ineffable. Yeah? So when we move from, in a way, integration, positive emotion, golly, that's enough of a challenge, isn't it? Especially, meanwhile, you're trying to live, and get to work, and sometimes you read these books, don't you? And you think the author must be living it on their own in the country and have a private income, because when do they get all these mystic moments? They don't ever seem to be doing anything. I am not that author. That matter of integration, we don't know how deep it goes. The matter of positive emotion, we don't know how far it can go. Buddhism saying it can go much further than you expect. Much, much further, yeah. So even though they're sort of demanding enough and radical enough, actually there's further and still to go beyond them, yeah. As I said, in this tradition, in the Triratna Buddhist order and movement, we emphasize spiritual death and rebirth at the point of ordination. Really, you can only valuably turn your mind to those great issues to the degree to which you're already integrated and positive, to a fair degree. I mean, do it back on it. To a fair degree, enough anyway, and that you're committed, especially you're committed to Buddhism as your life's work. In other words, not Buddhism even, but you're committed to a value that is taking you forward, and that's what you want to. That's what you want to sort of have the leading matter of your life, yeah, is value, and that those values become embodied in the Buddha himself. Yeah. So usually we only teach these stages. We mainly teach these stages just in the run-up to ordination and ordination onwards. Although the other stages never end. You never finish integration, and you never finish positive emotion. Actually, most of us have never been tested in terms of positive emotion. We've probably not been in a war situation. We've not been in a situation where we're hungry. Most of us have never been in a situation where the lights go off even. If you're in India, the lights go off all the time. I can't remember the last time the lights went off. Even when I was a child, you used to quite regularly have blackouts, and the excitement of finding torches and lighting candles. I remember that being very exciting. Hardly ever happen now, do they? It wouldn't have to happen for very long before it starts to getting really worrying. Yeah. It wouldn't have to happen very long when the food supply starts to run out in wherever you go. Then your positive emotion will start to get tested very, very much. One of the reasons why it's so difficult to get a real sense of ourselves is because we're living in such a privileged way, all of us are. It's very, very difficult to get a sense of just how deep, for instance, our hatred can go, just how deep our instinct for survival will go, just how deep our fear can go. Yeah, because very often we're kind of protected by that, and thank whoever you thank nowadays, thank heavens, I suppose, that we are. But it would be very, very frightening as those protections start to go, and they could go very, very quickly, as we all know. So we very often our positive emotion on our integration is not really tested. So one of the things we need to do in integration of positive emotion is grasp the tests when they do come. When suddenly you didn't get the job, or you didn't get the girl, or you didn't get what you want, or you got what you want and actually you don't want it anymore. One of the things we need to do to grow up is notice that we're now being tested a bit. Our resources are being tested, and can we rise to that? If we can't rise to that in small things, it's very unlikely we'll be able to rise to it in larger things. So when we're talking, that's enough to talk about, really. We could almost kind of talk about that for the whole 8 weeks. Well, we certainly could, and much more. But that's not the whole of the Buddhist path. What we're trying to do in this course is give you a sense of the whole of the Buddhist path. Pretty nearly impossible to do, actually. It was my bright idea. But, sometimes I think, whose idea was it? It was mine. Clever clogs. So we're trying to get you a sense of the whole of the path. So you then have, on the basis of integration of positive emotion, you have what we call, rather clumsily, spiritual death, and probably even still more clumsily, spiritual rebirth. Yeah. So I want to try and say more now about spiritual rebirth in the time allotted to me, which isn't very much, and then I'll get us to talk about our home practice. So I've been trying to think about what I wanted to say, and what I want to go back to is something I brought out earlier, that Bhante Sangharakshita, the founder of this movement and order, said, is that he said that we're an oxymoron, we're risen ape and fallen angel. Yeah? That's what we human beings are, is risen ape and fallen angel. He's using that language very poetically and suggestively, but the more I've thought about it, the more there seems so much in it. That we're an oxymoron. In other words, we're a living contradiction. We live in contradiction. We're partly an ape and partly an angel. It's almost as if I think that we're almost Janus-faced. We've got two faces. One of them is a face of an ape. Nice face, don't get me wrong. And the other face is the face of an angel. Yeah? That's what makes life so difficult. If we were one or the other, it would be fairly straightforward. If you were just an ape, then all you'd be concerned with is food, sex, and shelter, and a bit of fun, a bit of light entertainment. That would do you. You'd be satisfied with that, as long as you've got food, sex, and shelter, and the odd circus, or whatever the modern equivalent of that is. You'd be fine with that, and that'd be fine. You wouldn't be coming along here, certainly, because you'd be fine with that. That's all you need. In fact, you'd be going off for some food, sex and shelter, or a bit of light entertainment. I'm doing what I can on the light entertainment front, but this is not like the best place, like lots of films on at night. But we're also, rather almost frustratingly, an angel. We've got this mad yearning for experience that goes beyond the ape, beyond our nature, that we're in a way not quite equipped for, not wholly equipped for. And if we were just angel, that would be all right, because we wouldn't be bothered about food, sex and shelter and light entertainment. We'd just be angelically present all the time and shining, What's weird is that sometimes we do. It's really striking when I teach, when I do a lot of teaching, and sometimes people look like angels, and sometimes they look like apes. Of course, we all look like angels at the moment, and so do I, let's be clear. Sometimes it's quite really striking, really striking, yeah. So what I was thinking about that is the ape. When I mean ape, what I'm thinking of is that we are part of nature. We forget that because we're living in so much in our head and so much in technology now that we're increasingly, I think, forgetting that we're a developed ape, sometimes not that developed, with all of those instincts that an ape has. So, if something threatens you, you've got all of those aggressive instincts against threat. I was telling that story about holding Alex, my partner's oldest girl, and really feeling like a wolf. I suddenly, or sometimes just today I had a slightly painful conversation with someone on Skype, and I felt hurt by an interaction, and I was talking about that, and golly, sometimes you think, golly, I really am hurt by that. And I don't know what to do about that, and I'm trying not to act out of it and so on. But, to be emotionally hurt, it's amazing how painful that can be, emotionally hurt. And that's because we're pack animals, probably, partly. So how you are in relation to other people has a massive effect on you. The other night when I was asleep, somebody was buzzing the bell at like 1 o'clock in the morning. And you had this horrible sort of, when you're half asleep, it's like this sort of nightmare thing, what's going on, You can suddenly feel this terrible fear. You ever get that at night when particularly someone buzzes about this terrible kind of fear, which you didn't know you had. It's a fear of death, it's a fear of attack, of injury. All of those, they're all to do with our nature. We're risen out of nature, and we're very much protected from that. But if something goes wrong and you suddenly feel this fear, or your anxiety, or your aggression, or your lust. When you're young in certain moods, you really do feel. I mean, you don't do this, but you really feel like you would knock somebody down in the street, given an unbridled, But you don't do that, and it's not a great chat-up line. That's a joke. Sorry, folks. But the levels of our animal lust and aggressions and protective instinct, sometimes it's that, isn't it? Like it was with Alex, or fear. They're huge things, and they run off right into the dark. You can think they're not there. Well, just talking to someone, they fell off their bike, and you, in the moment before you fall off, you think, I'm omnipresent. Nothing happens to you, and you're off, and it's like such a shock that you're this mortal creature. And when you fall off, if you fall off, even if you're not hurt, it's a terrible shock that you were immortal a minute ago. You were thought you were the angel, and you suddenly have this horrible feeling that you're this mortal creature that's really easy to injure. Really, really easy to injure. It's such a shock, yeah. So so integration is about integration of positive emotion. It's about taking ownership of the animal, living through the body more and more. Actually, not getting too far away from the body, especially not into this terrible headspace where we're just living our life in terms of our stories about our life. That's increasingly so destructive. So you're trying to embody yourself more and more, and you're trying to own more and more the reality of your life, that you're not a nice person, I'm afraid, nor am I, and there's everything still to learn. So golly, if I don't get what I want, there's this real reaction. If I do get, all sorts of things. And you're not pessimistic about that, you're just trying to say, well, that's just what we're like. And you do your best, but you need to do your best on the basis of a real knowledge of yourself and a real self-ownership. What I haven't talked about, and which takes that a bit further, is what's a bit weirder about us is that we aren't just a sort of species type. Apparently it's not even true of species types. Like, you see sheep and they all look basically the same, and you think they're all... But apparently farmers say, no, they've got quite different characters. I mean, I don't think you get a bookish one. Although you do get gay goats, apparently, but that's another matter. They all wear tight white T-shirts. It's very and like really good listeners. Anyway, sorry. Some of my jokes can be a bit risky, but we're all right with that. So one of the things we're trying to work out is what kind of creature am I? And how do I work? How do I work best? How do I function in the world with the kind of typology I've got? Extrovert, introvert, this type, that type. There's different kinds of ways of thinking about typology. But one of the things you're trying to work out about yourself is how does this strange creature that I am function at its best? How much time do I need alone? How much time do I need with others? If you're getting unhappy, the instinct is to look to psychology sometimes for answers. Oh, it's because of things in my childhood. That's my habit, because I've been unhappy a lot of my life, at least when I was younger, very unhappy man, generally speaking. So I always looked for, where did it all go wrong? Where did I knit instead of purl, the jumper of my life? Where did I just go wrong? And then it all went wrong from there, and I thought all I had to do is unpick the whole jumper back to that original injury and then do it again, and grow it properly. And there's value in that up to a point, but I soon got to that point. Sometimes it's just better to think, what is functionally doesn't work for me here? What do I do that makes my life not work for me? Like I'm a creative type. I'd be one of those dreadful people doing advertising. And if if I'm not doing some kind of creative thing, I go a bit mad. All the sort of perfectionism that comes out of creativity goes onto things that it really doesn't need to go onto, and makes me a bit, kind of overbearing and so on. So I have to have a sort of creative aspect of my life, and I know friends of mine who do need quite a lot of time on their own. I don't need so much, but I need more than I expect. I'm extrovert, but I need this kind of inner thing, and if I don't have that enough, I start to feel I don't like my life. So if you start to feel you don't like your life, it might be better to think you haven't yet worked out what kind of life you need to be leading, and then you try to fashion your life more and more around the kind of creature you are. Quite difficult to work out, and you can't do it on your own. That's why you need friends that can be honest with you, who can say, no, I just don't think that brings up, don't do that won't work for you. Once I was the director of the centre for a very short period, and I was taken out and shot to put me out of my misery. And it just made me really anxious. It was really humiliating, because, I've been here at the centre for donkey's years, I know it pretty much backwards. And I would have all these sort of meetings where I was organising things, and I just get anxious about every detail. And I kept saying to myself, what's the matter? You know what I mean? It's not, it's not the UN. Get a grip. And it just didn't work. And, eventually I had to admit, it just, like, against my type, it just didn't work for me. And I still don't really understand that. I'm just not that kind of guy. Working out the kind of creature you are, you're bound to make mistakes. But it's really, really important to make mistakes. It's really important to make mistakes. If you don't make mistakes, no way are you going to learn. So you're bound to make mistakes. That's just because you're a human being. But let's try and think, what have I got to learn from that? The other week, talking about myself all the time, but the other week I got starting to feel a bit miserable and thinking, why is that? I think I mentioned I want to go on retreat, and then all I did on a Saturday is I only had one appointment. Normally I see a lot of people, and I only just had one that Saturday. So I could have breakfast with my community and not have much to do that morning. And suddenly I was fine. It wasn't a big psychological problem about, what happened. It was just that I can get into over-scheduling my life in a certain way because I'm very kind of ambitious. And then before I know it, I hate my life. It just feels like it's all scheduled, and all work, if you see what I mean. And as you get older, if you're not careful, you can turn everything into work. So as soon as I didn't do that for a day, I immediately felt better. So it's usually kind of structural things. When things go wrong, don't think what is wrong with me. Just try to think, this is trying to show you that something about your creature doesn't work in these environments. So try to work that out. It's actually very mysterious, I find. And you need your friends around you to say, oh no, don't do that. That really, oh no. a friend of mine, he trained as a lawyer. I mean, if you look at him, you think, absolutely not a lawyer. No way. You know, he used to be a rugby player. You think, yeah, I can see that. But lawyer? He used to be like, no. He was like self-harm, you know, training as a lawyer. I don't know where he got that idea. It was so obviously against his creatureliness, yeah? So that's part of the risen ape, is you have to kind of work out precisely what kind of ape you are and how that works best in your own interest and in other people's interest. If you don't get that right, you'll hurt yourself, and more importantly, you'll hurt other people. Yeah? You need to stretch yourself as well, otherwise the kind of creature you are, isn't it? If you think that's a passive creature who's always fragile, you'll just make yourself more passive and fragile. But then you've got, as if that isn't hard enough, then you've got this angel. And by that I mean that if one side of us is looking all the way down into our nature, which goes back millions of years, you know, most of human, you know, prehistory is, you know, it's hugely underwater, isn't it? You know, language is quite late. Also, you know, most of what we are, most of our bone, is nothing to do with what we think. It's nothing to do with the 20th century. It's nothing to do with history. Most of it's to do with, you know, our distant archaeology. So our one side of us, our ape, as it were, nature, goes all the way back into the earth like that, connects us with everything as well, because we're connected with the whole of life, because we're through our creaturely nature. So one of the reasons why when we see a blackbird, I mean, apparently blackbirds are actually dinosaurs. You know, they're just actually dinosaurs. Someone was saying they actually are dinosaurs. They don't look like dinosaurs, do they? But anyway, I'll leave you to look that up because I'm out of my range. But you feel a kind of kinship with it because there is a kinship with it. Now, if we spend more and more time online and so on, we won't feel that kinship with it. But as soon as you relax a bit and you have a good night's sleep and you're in a good state, so, you know, you hear a blackbird and you feel a kind of a kinship with it, and that's because you're joined, quite literally joined in nature. There's lots of share that you've got with a blackbird, with a cat. You know, that's why we get cats so much, with a dog. But you've got this other side, which is an angel, and that reaches into infinity, just to make things more tricky. The angel, the metaphor of the angel is that there are ranges of experience that reach, you know, in traditional pre-Reformation angelology, you've got, you know, ranges of, that's a posh word, you've got ranges, you know, layers and layers of angels going from you, just straight above you, all the way up to God. What the Reformation did is they got rid of all the angels and they were just left with you and then unimaginably far away God. So then every time you try to rise yourself up, you're bound to fail. One of the consequences of the break of that metaphor is that you just left you with unredeemed human beings and perfect Godhead. Before that, before the Reformation, you had, you know, ranks of angels going literally from straight above your head all the way up, all more and more refined. Yeah? Thrones, principalities, all they've got different names, seraphim, cherubim. So what the metaphor of that is that we human beings, and it is a metaphor, it's not literal, of course, which not to say it doesn't mean something, it's not true, it's just not literal, which means that your experience ranges off into heaven. Your experience ranges off into the infinite, into the unknowable. Yeah? And this is there already. Whether you like it or not, actually, it's already there. That half of you is ape and half of you an angel. And what you get on retreat, for instance, you notice really clearly is you manage to educate the ape. I can't think of the metaphor breaks down, but you take responsibility for yourself. You sort of feel more unified, more human, more embodied. And strangely, through that, you start to have more experiences of the angel, if you know what I mean. You start to have experience of dhyana, of samadhi. You start to see things as being more beautiful. I mean, the trouble is the whole angel side has been taken over by religion, and really quite often disastrously taken over. It's been sort of cordoned off for the world of religion. Actually, it's already there. We have this infinity within us. Not even within us, because that's problematic, but we have within us, or without us, we have in this human being infinities, and they are reachable. They're not separate from you. They can be experienced in all kinds of ways, in all kinds of situations. I talked about the artistic situation, for instance, but for instance, a fairly common experience of that angelic side is when you experience beauty. It's when you see things as beautiful. You can't. And if someone says, "Well, what do you mean by beautiful?" You can't say. You just think, "Well, it's beautiful." And sometimes that experience of beauty can be overwhelmingly beautiful. It's one of the reasons why people still listen to music, is because it can be beautiful and it can feel like it opens up all of that side of them, if you see what I mean. I remember a while ago going to see the Meistersingers, which is an opera I didn't know, and then, I won't tell you the whole story, it'd take too long, but at one point I seemed to be sort of taken out of myself into this incredibly beautiful music, and I seemed to move in the music and kind of literally be taken up. It was one of the most humanly thrilling experiences I've ever had. And what was interesting about it is I wept. I sat there listening to this music. It's a quintet. There's a quintet. I think it's a quintet in Act 3, 4 or 5, at the last act. And suddenly in this production they were all sitting together on stage, and then there's this music, and it goes up and up, and I seem to go up with the music, and I found myself just weeping and weeping. And I was telling somebody about it and said, "Don't tell people that." Anyway, that's true. I was just waiting, and I was weeping so much. I thought I would actually, I thought, I'd be carried out. And I was thinking, even in the experience of thinking, why am I weeping? And it was like, when you have real experiences of beauty, you know them, and you have this terrible sense of, well, of course that's always there, and I've forgotten it again. Oh, what a relief! I know it. I've always known it. There it is, and you weep for your separation from it, that you'd forgotten it, that you got caught up in the ape. Actually, mostly you've just got caught up in the computer, but you've forgotten that you've got this incredible range, and that's all there waiting for you. And when you touch it again, well, in my experience, very, very often I sort of weep and think, why have I forgotten this? This is like absolutely crucial. That's why people still bother about the so-called arts, is because it can touch on something that feels that is absolutely crucial to my whole life. At last, thank you so much for that. Yeah. Sometimes people have that in contact with nature, particularly, yeah, or in contact with art. It can be through altruistic activity. In one of the book I've written, I think Thicker Than Blood, I was talking about an experience I had on the number 8 bus, and I know exactly what happened. It happened about just over there. I was on the bus, I was coming back, and I'd been with a friend, and suddenly as I sat there, and we just sort of chatted and went quiet as you do on a long bus ride, it was coming evening, suddenly I just felt this overwhelming love towards him. It really quite frightened me. It just came up, it like arose up in my body, this incredible love that just sort of opened out and out and out, and really sort of both beautiful and kind of frightening. And then it quite quietly, then it closed down again. But so many people, if you talk to people deeply, nearly everyone will say they've got a touch of this. And Buddhism is just saying, yeah, of course, that's all there, that you can be open to that. That's why this idea of the secular is so poor, so impoverished, because it condemns us, usually just to the rational, and to the ape. And that's just not true. It's just not true. Again and again you meet people who've had experiences that cannot be accounted for, really cannot. Sometimes in the worst possible conditions that cannot be accounted for. So that is what spiritual rebirth is getting at. That when you die into into your experience, when you let go of gripping onto me and what I know and what I believe and what I think and here's my opinion on that, when you die into that and when you die into your life, you start to experience a new consciousness arising, which goes beyond you, but which isn't separate from you, and which, when you even have a slight taste of, is meaning itself, is what you've always wanted. You see what I mean? It's not God, it's not some divine entity, it's meaning itself. So, what I suggest today, this week, for your sort of home practice, see if you can carry on doing something from all the stages. So see if you can do your walking, mindful walk, because we need to keep on coming back to the ape. We need to keep on living through this creaturely life. Otherwise we'll just be living from the front part of our head, or just disappeared into our screens. So we need to keep coming back to our creaturely nature and drawing ourselves, gathering ourselves back into that. And then see if you can do something from positive emotion, so that you're making a contribution to your life and to the lives of others. That's what will matter when you die, is what the contribution you've made. Yeah? And then see if you can do something that invokes spiritual death. So it might be you apologise for something. It might be that you say to someone, that was my fault, I'm sorry about that. It might be that you just act a little bit less selfishly. You think a bit more of them rather than you. And then see if you can, the only way you can cultivate spiritual rebirth, because it's on will that comes in, it takes you over. That's how it feels like. Sometimes massively takes you over. In meditation, for instance, you literally can feel like you disappear. All sorts of experiences you can have through meditation. Incredible experiences you wouldn't believe. You can't will that to happen. But what you can do is cultivate your imagination. So that's what I was trying to do there in that meditation at the start, is you cultivate your imagination. Your imagination directly affects you. So in my morning meditation this morning in this room, I was sitting there with quite a lot of pain today for some reason. I won't go on about it. I had quite a lot of discomfort in my meditation. So what I did is I tried to really go into that. I need to feel through that, not react to it. It's a painful, physical, creaturely experience. So I really tried to feel into that. And then I imagine there's this Buddha figure in front of me that's not in that, and that's shining light into me. And as soon as I did that this morning, the whole thing slightly changed. Not massively, but slightly changed. Your imagination affects your body. If you imagine it, your body responds to it. So the only way really to start to cultivate spiritual rebirth is to cultivate your imagination. So 2 ways you might do it. There's lots of ways to do it. One is to improve the contents of your imaginative life. Some of the way in which we spend our imaginative life is incredibly thin. If all you're doing is flicking through Facebook or looking at your this or that, it's very, very thin. It just won't do very much. So, read a novel, read some poetry for heaven's sake, remember that. Go to a decent film rather than a potboiler. See if you can do something that really enriches your spiritual life this week. Put some time aside to do it. When did you last have an evening, or even an hour or 2 hours, where you just sit and read a novel, and you just disappear from this world? That's why you read novels, is not to be good for you, so you can disappear from this world. Because this world is really painful and really hard, and there are always appointments, and there's always things to do. And I don't know about you, but I need to disappear from this world really very regularly, otherwise I can't stand it. Even as a child, I just used to daydream all the time. And adults need to daydream, and that's what books do. They guide you in your daydreams. So see if you can do something to to enrich your imagination. Go to see a play. What does it for you? What sparks your imagination off? And it's often very particular. And often I think you need to sort of start with what you know does it for you, and then see if there's a deeper way of doing that. So if you write like novels, what would be a slightly deeper version of that novel? So you read that. I used to read Agatha Christie when I was young. Sorry about that. And then I remember reading Dostoevsky because I thought, I'll read Crime and Punishment, seems about the same thing. And you read it and you think, oh, that's like fantastic. I remember that time, I was about 18 when I read it. It just blew me away. I just thought, oh, I see, it's like really, really good. Yeah. So that's one way in which you can enrich your imagination. The other thing I wanted to recommend is that you spend some time in the natural world. Yeah. Even if it's just a park, or even if it's just sitting in your garden, but just doing nothing. Go for a walk where you don't have your iPhone on, you go off grid. You just try to experience the natural world because you're part of the natural world. And the more you separate yourself from the natural world, you break yourself from your imagination. Your imagination grows out of the body. It grows out of your connection with nature. I'm going to read later on I'm going to read a Ted Hughes poem to finish, and it is a brilliant understanding he's got a brilliant sense of nature and his connection with nature, and that liberates his imagination. Yeah. So just have a few minutes just to say, let's just try and find one thing you can do from each of those stages. Perhaps that's too much. So just say one thing you can do from integration and one way in which you can enliven your imagination in this coming week. Yeah, so just pair up for a minute.